Hello and welcome then guys to the final pick in my top 30 wish list, the last vehicle of my very specifically selected range of 30 cars, which if I had the opportunity of seeing any cars added to Gran Turismo in a future game, these would be the 30 that I would want to see above all others. Now obviously tastes change over time and new cars come out all the time, but for the moment at least, these top 30 are pretty much unrivaled as far as the cars that I would love to see on the game. We've discussed cars that have already been on the game, we've discussed cars that have been on other games but not Gran Turismo, and we've discussed cars which have, to my knowledge, never been featured on any racing game. This car is almost on Gran Turismo, but not quite. It's a Cobra, which is one of my favourite classic cars. In fact, the Cobra may be quite possibly my favourite classic car of all time as an overall package. Not any specific Cobra, but just the whole lineup, from the 289, from AC or Shelby, all the way up to this vehicle, which is to all intents and purposes the ultimate Cobra, at least the ultimate racing Cobra. Ultimately, this car was unfortunately ill-fated as far as racing goes, and basically it was built as part of Ford's initiative to want to beat Ferrari. Now ultimately, of course, it was the GT40 that accomplished that. This car, though, could quite well have beaten Ferrari had it got the chance. Now the 427 Super Coupe takes the overall concept of the Daytona Cobra, which we already have, of course, on the game, as the 289 Daytona Cobra, which most of them were, which is incidentally one of my favourite classics on Gran Turismo, and I consider to be possibly the best handling of all of the classic race cars, not including the Chaparral, because that's ridiculous to compare it. And the 289 Daytonas had performed pretty well in racing, but in 1964 they'd fallen just short of the mark for winning the World Manufacturers' Championship. They only lost by a few points. So what Shelby decided to do was take it up a notch, make an ultimate Cobra. Instead of the 289 or 4.7 litre engine, they used a Ford 7 litre or 427 cubic inch V8, producing significantly more power than the 289, 485 horsepower. Now Ford built the engine, Ford also built the body, and AC Cars built the chassis. The car was ultimately assembled for the most part and finished by Shelby in America, but due to the time constraints of the project and due to the slack way of some workers who were involved in Britain, unfortunately, in building the car, or taking their time in building the car, the minimum of 100 cars required to homologate the vehicle for racing was not done in time. And that's a shame, because the 427 Super Coupe could well have been one of the fastest classic race cars. The top speed is believed to be around 215 miles per hour, and that's entirely believable given its aerodynamics and the sheer power of that engine. It is far faster than any other racing Cobra in a straight line. Around corners it may not necessarily be as good as a 289, open top or Daytona, but in a straight line there's no comparison at all. It would have easily blown away the Ferraris at Le Mans, least of which on the straights. And if you like the opening of this video, be sure to stick around to the end to hear some more of this car in action, because it is an incredible sounding machine. And interestingly, a couple of years ago, this car was actually sold at auction for a surprisingly low $1.3 million. Now that's a lot of money, but for a car as unique and historically significant as this, being as it is the ultimate Cobra, that's a shockingly low price. Now the Daytona that we already have on the game is a 4.5 million credit car, and I would like to see this vehicle cost anything from 10 million credits upward. 10 million would be definitely the absolute minimum. Technically, I think it's deserving of being a 20 million credit car. because that would put it head on against the GT40s and the more expensive Ferraris, also the XJ13. To be honest, I have the utmost confidence that it could outrun all of those vehicles for pure top speed, considering that even when fully upgraded, many of those cars struggle to exceed 240 miles per hour. This car already does 215, so with more power, and that engine certainly has the potential for more power, it could be one of the quickest classics in the game, possibly even the quickest classic race car in the game, not including again the Chaparral, which is almost unfair to compare, being a Can-Am car in a completely different league. The quickest, more GT type vehicle of the classic racing category at least. In terms of handling, it's hard to say, because although the Daytona that we currently have on the game is, as far as I'm concerned, a superb handling car, there's no real way of knowing how this would handle in comparison. People have driven it, it's been tested of course, so they would know, and the increased weight and size of the car compared to a 289 Daytona would affect it of course, but the sheer straight line performance on tracks such as Le Mans, potentially Monza as well, and tracks like that, would more than make up for it. To be honest, I think the handling would still be pretty good, because the Cobra in general is a deceptively competitive car. It has a reputation for having bad handling, but the Cobra actually is not a bad handling car. It's just more of a skilled car to use properly. You have so much power in such a relatively compact and lightweight chassis that it's a pro driving car only. The Daytona Cobra makes it a lot easier by having a smaller, less torquey engine and more downforce, but even then, it's not necessarily a beginner's car. It's a car for people who love classics and who want to use a classic that can actually take on modern cars and beat them. The Daytona that we already have on the game can do that. This car, even more so. Now, the Daytona that we already have on the game is about the closest comparison that we could make to the 427 Super Coupe. So how does it compare? Well, that car has excellent handling, a good price, it's one of the most competitive classics, and in terms of straight line performance, it has a top speed when fully tuned of around 225 miles per hour under its own power, without draft, with a low downforce setting. That's pretty good. Now, this car only has a 4-speed gearbox to work with, but straight out of the box, this engine is producing over 100 horsepower more than the Daytona that we currently have, and significantly more torque. It's also more aerodynamic. So a top speed of 240 I would think is pretty much guaranteed. 250 more likely than not, considering that that's how quick the Ferrari P4 is, and I have no doubt whatsoever that this car could keep up with that, and to be honest, definitely beat it, I would say, in a straight line at least. As far as the looks, it's a bit more of a Marmite vehicle, as some of my picks are, especially compared to how good looking the Daytona is, and how good the regular open-top Cobra is in both 289 and 427 forms. It's certainly different to other Cobras and other Daytona Cobras, to say the least. But I personally like it. It kind of reminds me of some of the bigger, older Ferraris. It has that abruptly cut-off back end, almost like someone has taken a bite out of the back of the car. Overall, it's chunkier, rounder, taller, and a little bit narrower looking than the regular Daytona. It doesn't look quite as long, although it's pretty similar in length. And I like the look of the car. I think it adds more of an exotic flair to the shape of the Daytona. I also love the 2 extra driving lights in the front end, which would undoubtedly look fantastic when they're turned on driving around the Le Mans at night, because at the end of the day, that was the purpose of this car. It was designed to destroy Ferrari at the Le Mans. Had it had the chance, I believe it would have. I believe it would have also beaten the GT40, but unfortunately, that's not the way history panned out. So, as you'll have seen at the start of the video, I did note at the bottom of the screen what channel this video was from, and I will be putting a link in the description below to his channel to check out this video, and I would definitely recommend doing so if you liked the sound of this car, the look of it, because it's a really good video. Ultra rare to see the car in action, and it's a great video to see if you are a fan of Cobras, muscle cars in general, potentially with the 427 engine, and just classic race cars for look, sound, and what they're like to drive. So that's it overall for the top 30 series. Not necessarily my ultimate most wanted car to end with, just a car which I've always liked in all of its forms, and this is at the end of the day the ultimate form of that particular car. So if you are new to this series, then be sure to slap down below what cars you would personally love to see, maybe one, maybe more, feature on a future Gran Turismo game. It doesn't really matter how realistic the suggestion is, just slap down there what you'd like to see. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.